Welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com, and we are back for another edition of this fantastic new series that we've been hitting Alabama football's best 15 games of the 21st century. As you know, we're counting down from 15 to 1, and it's really been a fun look back at some of the all-time best games that we've seen in our lifetimes. Today's number 9, and it's single digits, so you know that these are the biggest and best games, and our pick for the 9th best Alabama football game of the 21st century is Alabama versus Clemson in 2008. And helping me to do this, as usual, our good friend, Beat Everyone producer, Matt Scalisi. Matt, we were in college at the same time. I think that you're out at this point. What are you up to? What are you up to in the fall of 2008 as this season is about to kick off?
Well, I was at this game.
Whoa.
I was at this game in the stands, and this was back when it was at so first of all, a fun note about this game. This was actually the first ever Chick-fil-A kickoff game. So these sort of season opening neutral site matchups, this was a very novel thing for the time. I was at this game. I was sitting in the end zone in the Georgia Dome. I will say this. I was I was actually a father at this point. I had my first child about 3 months before this game. So I had a 3-month-old child at home with my wife, and I picked up and went to this game and absolutely acted like a person who should not be responsible for a child. I'll say that.
I was not there. So I was at a wedding that weekend, and like good Alabama fans, they had the wedding on the Sunday after this game. That tells you like how much anticipation there was for this season. Nick Saban's second season, obviously, but we piled into like a hotel like conference room or something. They set up this barbecue buffet, and like the wedding party just like set up a TV, and we all watched together, and it was this whole thing, this big viewing party for what would be a pretty insane moment in the history of Alabama football and the history of Nick Saban's tenure as the Alabama head coach. And you're right. I mean, this was August. We're going to hit the opening drive here. We're going to go through our categories as usual, Matt. But this was August 30th, 2008. And this is, as you said, the inaugural Chick-fil-A college kickoff. This was the season opener for Nick Saban's second year as the Alabama head coach. Following the 2007 season, he finished 6-6 overall in the regular season, and they ended on a high note in the Independence Bowl with a win over Colorado. So, you know, you can't really talk about this game without noting everything that led up to it. But the biggest thing to me, Matt, like the biggest storyline maybe of this season, and certainly this game when we would see it all like on display, we would see it all come to fruition. It's the 2008 recruiting class. And we've covered sort of what kind of operation Saban set up when he got to Tuscaloosa, but this is really what set it all into motion. It established Saban as maybe the best recruiter in the history of the sport. And, you know, I want to go back to his 2007 press conference, Matt, where he really put it out there, sort of like his philosophy on coaching, competition, life. He explained the process, right? But he also talked about, you know, wanting to help players grow on and off the field. He really just kind of explained what the next 2 decades of college football would look like at Alabama. And here's what he said, Matt, quote, "What I would like for every football team to do that we play is to sit there and say, I hate playing these guys. I hate playing them, their effort, their toughness, their relentless resiliency to go out every play and focus and play the next play and compete in the game for 60 minutes in the game. I can't handle it. That's the kind of football team we want," end quote. Matt, Saban made a statement in that press conference, but he also made a statement with this recruiting class, who I think pretty much exemplified everything that he pitched in that quote and in that press conference. What was so special about this group?
Well, I think it was a confluence of Alabama had this coaching staff who knew the secrets of great recruiting. They also had demonstrated long-term success as on-field coaches, which makes their job easier as recruiters. But also, and this shouldn't be understated, I think, this happened to be a year where there was a sort of bumper crop of elite talent in the state of Alabama. And for people who don't follow recruiting, Alabama is certainly, I think, a strong base when it comes to putting out football talent, but it's kind of fluctuating, right? So any given year, you're talking about somewhere in between, 5 and 15 guys that we would call sort of blue chip elite prospects coming out of the state of Alabama. Goes up and down. It depends on the year. 2008 happened to be a huge year. And particularly at the top, there were some guys who were truly national level recruits, could have played anywhere in the country if they wanted to. And so Nick Saban and his new staff come along at just the right time to make an impact on those guys. They started working on this class the second they hit the ground in Tuscaloosa in 2007. And they knew it would be important for them, and they knew they had an opportunity, and they executed magnificently, and they put this, I mean, they truly got just about everybody they wanted, and they definitely got the people who they viewed as most important to the recruiting class. And I would say primarily you're talking about Julio Jones and Mark Barron. Those were the two in-state guys that everybody in America wanted. And Nick Saban knew, if I can get these guys, I've got a future NFL first round level talent on both sides of the ball for me, and I can build out from there.
You mentioned Julio Jones, Mark Barron. Let's just run through a few of the names who are part of this class. Mark Ingram, Dante Hightower, Marcel Darius, Courtney Upshaw, Damian Square, Barrett Jones, Terrence Cody. And that's just to name a few. It's like half of this
And,
class.
and what's wild is that Mark Ingram and Terrence Cody, who I would say are as iconic as any players that ever played for Saban, they were kind of under the radar guys on signing day. They were not necessarily guys that everybody was excited about. Ingram was a 4-star recruit, but you know, he was kind of getting offers from, I would say, mid-level Big 10 schools. Iowa was after him, Michigan State was after him. But Saban, I think, saw something in him and saw some extra potential in him, and had that family connection with him too, that I don't think everybody else saw the way that they did in Julio Jones. And Terrence Cody was a guy who, he was tipping the scales at 400 pounds when Nick Saban went and found him at junior college. I think a lot of people looked at him and said, there's no way this guy can play for a whole football game. And he really went through a transformation. He got into that fourth quarter program in the offseason, and I think he handled it a lot better than anybody expected him to. And he made himself into a legendary player. And what's crazy about that class too, Ben, is how fast they made an impact. The game we're talking about today, it's got 2008 signees all over it.
Yeah. Terrence Cody, the mythology was already in place before he even like played it down. People had just heard about him and heard the specs that you had mentioned. This was a huge human being, somebody who could dunk a basketball even at that
Right.
size, and athletic, and somebody who was just going to make a difference as somebody who could plug the hole, a run stopper in what Alabama was trying to do. So this was a program changing class for a lot of reasons, and we'll get into more detail here in just a second. But Alabama's ranked 24th in the country. Clemson's number 9. They have high hopes behind their talented backfield of James Davis and CJ Spiller, known as Thunder and Lightning, as Alabama fans love to reminisce about. And, without spoiling too much, they would finish for a combined 8 carries and 20 yards on the ground in this game. John Parker Wilson returns for his senior season, his third year as the Alabama starting quarterback. More weapons than ever for him. We mentioned Ingram. Glenn Coffey is actually the starting running back. Roy Upchurch and Terry Grant are on the roster. Receivers like Julio Jones, Mike McCoy, plus tight ends Nick Walker, Travis McCall. I mean, the defense is loaded. We've mentioned Cody, Mark Barron, Rolando McClain, Javier Arenas, Kareem Jackson, Eric Anders, Rashad Johnson. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Matt, it was a 7 p.m. kick in the Georgia Dome in Atlanta in front of 70,000 plus fans. ABC broadcast the game with our guy, Brent Musburger, and Kirk Herbstreit. Herbstreit and Lisa Salters was on the sideline. Before kickoff, Musburger tosses to Salters, and she has Clemson coach Tommy Bowden, and she says to him, "You told me you want the offensive line to feel pressure. to feel like it's on them. How come? And Tommy Bowden says, because it takes it off me. And so he said this on TV before. So he's joking there, and he has kind of a laugh. But Matt, this was the era of Clemsoning, right? Help people remember or understand what that term really meant at the time.
I mean, I think pre Dabo, certainly pre national championship, Clemson had this national reputation of always blowing it in the big moments. And we called it Clemsoning back in the early days of the internet. But it was, Tommy Bowden was an interesting case because at this point he had been at Clemson for 10 years, which is no easy feat to accomplish even back then in college football. It's tough to hang around at a major program for that long, but they'd been pretty successful, certainly for, Clemson's standards historically up to that point. I mean, they had done a very respectable job. And I think also this was a guy who was known as an offensive guru. Tommy Bowden and his former offensive coordinator, Rich Rodriguez, had basically, transformed college football by popularizing the spread option back when they were at Tulane. And so obviously we know Rich Rodriguez had a long, complicated story after that, but Tommy Bowden went on to Clemson and they were doing a really good job. And as you said, they had figured out a way to really become an attractive place to offensive skill position players. And in fact, the 2008 recruiting class was pretty good for Clemson too. They brought in one of the best running backs in that class, a guy named Jamie Harper. And one of the ways they were able to do that was that Tommy reportedly promised Harper that he could have the first carry of the season opener. We can talk about that play now if you want to, but it turned out to not be a great decision on Tommy Bowden's part.
Yeah, who was on the other end of that?
Corey Reamer fired up the middle of the Clemson offensive line, forced a fumble on that first play. So as you said, you got CJ Spiller, you have these sort of all-American running backs back there, and they decide to go with a true freshman on the opening carry of the season, and it's a fumble immediately.
A gimmick, a recruiting promise.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think ultimately, and look, I should say we did a documentary for AL.com a few years ago called The Turning of the Tide. That's about the 2008 season. We did a whole episode basically on this game, and Tommy Bowden sat down for an interview with us, and he was so cool about it. He was very honest. He had no ego about it. He wasn't trying to make himself look good.
It wasn't so much were we going to win, how much were we going to win by. Of course, as a coach, you try to prepare your team totally different. You don't listen to what the newspapers say. I know this program. I know about the head coach. I know the quality of players they'd had. We recruited against Alabama a lot. Dabo Swinney was on my staff. We played at Alabama, recruited Alabama. I knew that it was going to be a very tough job, but the Clemson people were expecting a win and a significant win.
I think he sort of can look back and know college football is really complicated. It's tough to stay on top. It's tough to get on top in the first place. And I think a lot of coaches are just throwing stuff at the wall sometimes. They're trying whatever they can to make it work. And a lot of times those end up blowing up in your face. There's a reason why Nick Saban is in rarefied air.
Yeah, there was a famous report after this game or season that Tommy Bowden called Nick Saban and asked, how'd you do it? Like, where were our holes? Like, what did we do wrong? Just tell me how you beat us so badly in that game. And Alabama fans obviously have since weaponized that, right? And used that as like another notch in their belt, in Saban's belt, to say the least. But, Alabama gets the opening kick here. Musburger says, quote, well, the phenom, Julio Jones, we could be seeing him right here at the top, end quote. Julio and Javier Arenas are on kickoff return. What a combo. Man. Unbelievable. Julio's first play at Alabama, sort of like the other end of the spectrum from what you're talking about. His first play is a block. He blocks for Arenas down the field during kickoff return. And it's pretty indicative of what we've always seen and heard about him at Alabama, that he'll kind of do whatever it takes to win. He just wants to compete. Saban has talked about it a lot, how he not only changed the program by coming to Alabama, but changing that position, removing the ego from it, and just establishing himself as a leader, as a competitor. Matt, let's just quickly focus on Julio Jones for a second. Do you remember sort of what you were expecting from Julio Jones that night? And let's just kind of like try to remember the hype surrounding him going into this season. The expectations were high.
Well, I would say probably I was a much less cynical person in 2008, and thus wildly optimistic in a lot of ways that I wouldn't be today. Just having watched a lot of football and watched a lot of true freshmen and know that it's so rare. But Julio Jones is one of the few people that could live up to whatever expectations you put on him. And the hype was truly out of control heading into that first game. I mean, this is not to take us on too far of a tangent. There had been a video in 2008. I need people to understand how hard it was to leak a video onto the internet in 2008. There was no YouTube yet. There's no easy place to put videos, but somehow a video got uploaded online of Julio Jones from a preseason practice, making this incredible catch against Rashad Johnson, kind of stiff arming him into the ground and completing it for a touchdown. And that had made its way out into the public. The fact that somebody had tried to sneakily film this and upload it to the internet speaks in and of itself as to what the hype and the excitement was around this kid. And I mean, everybody's expectations for Julio Jones were very high, and he immediately delivered. He has as you said, he's on the opening kickoff team. A first drive of the game that is pretty much entirely focused on pounding the ball with the running backs. But Julio Jones is the one guy that gets a catch in that drive. And he's the sort of immediate safe option for John Parker to drop back and hit for a quick pass. I believe it's almost a first down. It's a pretty sizable gain. And Julio, I mean, there was no looking back. I mean, he becomes, I think, the most dangerous offensive weapon on this team in his very first game as a true freshman.
Alabama fans just kind of sensed or knew that they were in the presence of greatness, right? That they were lucky to have a player like this, that it came with the territory now that Nick Saban was the coach, but they hadn't seen somebody this talented on the Alabama roster since I don't know when. It was just something that felt new.
Sean Alexander, maybe? I mean, that's the only comparison I can think of.
Probably. But I mean, like, Alexander used his career to establish himself as becoming that guy. Julio was kind of ready-made, right?
Yeah,
like, he just looked the part.
He did not come out of the gate that way. Sean Alexander did have a huge impact as a true freshman.
You're right. Yes.
And shocked everybody, but it was a little further into the season. It wasn't like literally day one.
Yeah, and we won't go too far into the blow-by-blow here because this is a blowout, Matt. I mean, Alabama scores 2 field goals on their first 2 possessions. Then they put together a touchdown drive where Wilson scores on a 1-yard play. Clemson answers with a field goal before Wilson later finds tight end Nick Walker for a touchdown, and Lee Tiffin adds another field goal before halftime. It's 23-3 at the half. And, you know, to put it simply, Matt, this half kind of took everybody's breath away. Like, the sea change was clear. Alabama looked different. And as Saban would say post-game, it was only one game, right? Like, who really knew what would happen? But everyone with eyes understood what was happening. Alabama had something special. And for more on that, what Nick Saban said afterwards is from the it's from the AL.com documentary that you mentioned, The Turning of the Tide, right here.
Now, for Nick Saban, it was going to be managing expectation.
More than any touchdown, any catch, any tackle, I remember the post game. It was the first time we were introduced to the concept that Nick Saban would be angrier after a victory than he would ever be after a loss.
You know, what our players need to understand, what our fans need to understand, what everybody needs to understand. It's one game. It's one game. And we need to keep playing better, and we need to improve, and our players need to have the focus to improve. And remember how they got where they got, rather than think that we can just show up now and beat whoever we play. Because we have a tendency to think that way around here. Instead of just kicking people's ass like you're supposed to and working to do it.
And then we kind of hold the phone because CJ Spiller, this guy that we mentioned, the super talented running back, he comes out and he returns the opening kick in the second half for 96 yards and a touchdown. And that was pretty much it from Clemson. Julio Jones does have a short touchdown reception. Tiffin adds another field goal, and it's all Alabama, Matt, 34-10. And so I guess we get into this category now, the kill shot, like the play that told us that Alabama had effectively sealed the victory. Do you have anything for this? I mean, we've joked in some games on this list so far that it's when Alabama walked out onto the field. It was the first play of the game. Like, what do you think was the moment when you knew that this was over?
Yeah, I've got a candidate for sure, and it's not a spectacular individual play to look at. It's more what led up to it. So as this game begins, you mentioned, first quarter, it's pretty much all Alabama. It's 13-3 at the end of the first quarter. And Alabama gets the ball back after a Clemson field goal. So they're finally on the board. Alabama gets the ball, and they proceed to do, I think, what we would refer to today as joyless murder ball. We did not have the verbiage at the time. But this is a 14-play, 83-yard touchdown drive that takes 8 minutes and 16 seconds off the clock. You're talking about by the time this thing's over, right? So not only is Alabama now up 20-3 at the end of this drive, which ends in a short Nick Walker touchdown reception. Nick Walker, by the way, we've mentioned him a couple times. Alabama had these super interesting pair of tight ends in this 2008 season in Nick Walker, who was sort of an O.J. Howard type, if you will, kind of the receiving tight end. And then they had Travis McCall, who was a blocking specialist. But, you look up at the end of this drive, it had been the start of the second quarter. The whole game's ahead of you. Now the second quarter is halfway over, and you're down 20-3 all of a sudden. And to me, that's a kill shot. That it's the combination of we couldn't stop them, and it took them forever to do it. They absolutely dominated the clock. They're keeping our offense off the field. That is a backbreaker, I think, if you're an opponent, to watch it all happen from the sidelines and say, we can't get our defense a break. We don't even have a chance to get out there and do anything to fix this. It's just the most, it's the definition of making their ass quit.
You nailed it. I think you nailed it. The barbecue tasted better that night at that wedding party, Matt. It truly did. I can't remember where it was from, but I'll never forget the taste, right? And we should move on to the next category because I can't think of a better play in series and moment than of that just like symbolized what was happening in front of us. Let's name the MVP. Who won the game? This is usually a player, can be a coach, broadcaster, somebody who went viral, somebody we remember because of this game. Matt, who's the MVP of Alabama Clemson 2008?
I'm gonna let Tommy Bowden pick my MVP, actually, because when we spoke to him, he told us the difference in the game was Terrence Cody. It's that they were not prepared for him in any way. He said he knew that Alabama had this new big guy on the defensive line, but they thought, look, worst case, this guy will be out of energy by the third quarter. We'll start to run on him late in the game. But Clemson, as you noted, they're the thing that they're known for, James Davis and CJ Spiller, this 1-2 punch of running backs. They only end up with 8 carries on the day, and that's because Clemson abandons the run because it's doing nothing for them. They cannot move the ball on the ground because Terrence Cody is taking up 2 offensive linemen minimum to try to block him from getting through the line. And that, of course, disrupts everything you're trying to do offensively. They have to lean on Cullen Harper, a quarterback who was, fine, passable, but he was not meant to be the focal point of their offense. And they don't have the receiving talent to get it done. So Alabama's one piece of the puzzle on defense that made the biggest difference in that game, according to Tommy Bowden, was Terrence Cody.
Yeah, it's a great pick, and Cody was just such a major figure during this era, early in the Saban tenure. It's Nick Saban for me. He's the MVP, and I know that that's like an easy, obvious thing to say, but he backed up literally everything that he said in that opening press conference in January 2007. Like, he put a staff in place, as you mentioned. They recruited like maniacs. They built a championship contending team in what felt like record time, and they come out and they dominate in this game in front of everybody, and they reintroduce Alabama as a force in college football, and it has his signature all over it. And Matt, to me, this is arguably the signature game of Saban's career as the Alabama coach, all the way back in 2008. Like, it's a game that would send shockwaves throughout the sport and probably other sports at both the college and professional levels. I mean, it created unfair results and unfair expectations, I should say, for similar results. This kind of turnaround that convinced other programs that they could do the same exact thing. We want our Nick Saban. We want to make that big hire where somebody's going to come in and they're going to achieve that kind of instant success. And they'd fire the coach if they didn't, and they'd move on to the next guy who could. So this was really, truly lightning in a bottle. Saban was one of one, and this game to me was the largest piece of proof.
Ben, we were talking to Brody Croyle, and this might have been this might have been before he was on, actually, but we were talking about that game and how back then, right, pre Dynasty, hearing Alabama's name on SportsCenter, hearing them talked about in the national media, felt like a huge deal to us Bama fans, because we weren't used to. I mean, it had been a long time since we had been nationally relevant. And I can remember the night after this game. I can remember I was in Atlanta staying with a friend, and I can remember being in bed, having the TV on and watching the SportsCenter loop back around and hearing all the conversation. The biggest story of the day in college football was everybody talking about this Alabama win over Clemson. And it felt so different and new and thrilling to see Alabama being talked about that way. And like you said, Ben, I mean, it would be, I would love to go and find the SportsCenter for that night, or the college football final, or whatever it was, because everyone seemed shocked by it. They seemed baffled. And I would say, with the possible exception of Alabama versus Georgia later that season, this game is the last time that Alabama surprised people by how good they were. And it feels almost absurd to think of that today, but people could not believe that Alabama was this good. And I think this is the last time you could say that.
All right, Matt, last category here, takeaways. What were the consequences? Is the game look any different with the benefit of history? And we've gotten into that a little bit here. But, with this team, Matt, there are still some growing pains during the 2008 season, but it's pretty much off to the races for Alabama after this game. They finish the regular season undefeated. They dominate Arkansas. They make another statement in the game that you just mentioned at Georgia, the blackout game. They have close calls against Kentucky and Ole Miss, and then they beat LSU in an overtime thriller on the road. And then they whip Auburn 36-0 in Tuscaloosa in what was Tommy Tuberville's last Iron Bowl. And, they obviously lose to Tim Tebow in Florida in the SEC championship game. Florida goes on to beat Oklahoma in the BCS national title game. Alabama gets humiliated by Utah in the meaningless Sugar Bowl. So there's definitely a bitter taste in the mouths of Alabama fans after a season that really nobody expected. And Matt, this is my biggest takeaway here. People knew Alabama would be better. They knew that the 08 recruiting class, all the talent that was pouring in, they knew about all this, that Nick Saban was clearly building something, but no one could have expected what they did to Clemson in Atlanta that night. There's just something about that feeling that's difficult to articulate, difficult to even remember or relive, because it was like an out-of-body experience for Alabama fans. Because I think that although every single year they would declare Alabama will be back, this is going to be their year, 12 national championships, all that, I think that there was also the slightest creeping doubt that maybe it wouldn't happen. again, right? And this night against Clemson reassured them. It assuaged those concerns, any concerns they may have had. I think that they were believers no matter what, but this told them, like, okay, this is going to happen again in my lifetime.
I think so. I think it became clear that the trajectory of this program was very serious. This was not going to be a flash in the pan situation. This was how it was going to be from now on. And look, as you said, Florida got the better of Alabama at the end of this season, and Alabama was one more recruiting class away from basically being unbeatable, I would say. Um, and it took, uh, I think what's really remarkable is that even with essentially 1.5 recruiting classes, Alabama was able to be this good already under Nick Saban. I mean, it's still less than half the roster is made up of guys that Saban himself recruited to the program. And he's already doing this. He's already completely dominating top 10 teams, on national television in prime time. It, I think, was putting all of college football on notice, but I think also for Alabama fans, the faith was there. Not if it was wavering at all after 2007, Alabama fans were all in. They fully believed in what Nick Saban was doing after this, and they knew something was coming. Like you said, I think everybody felt like that national championship was within reach.
Well, that's number 9 on the list of Alabama football's 15 best games of the 20th century. And people should go watch that documentary that you and others at AL.com worked on, Matt. It's called The Turning of the Tide. It tells the story of the season in 2008. It was incredible to look back on it. And like you said, it's got an all-star cast of people talking about that year. So go back and watch that. We are moving through this list. Join us next week for 2 more episodes of the show, including Thursday when we hit number 8. You won't want to miss it. And you can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts as usual. Matt Scalisi, Beat Everyone producer. Thanks as always.
Thanks, Ben.
All right, I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. Thank you. We're going to see you next time.